I wanted to make this video about weed and psychoses, and also drugs and psychoses, really. When I had my first psychotic episode, it was caused because I was smoking weed for around 6 to 8 months intensely, every day. Not a lot, but enough. And obviously, because I had a genetic predisposition or a heritable quality about me that meant that I was more susceptible to psychoses, I had a break, because obviously there's lots of people that smoke loads of weed their entire lives, they never get psychoses. But for me, the way that I was wired didn't play nice with it. And so I had my first major break in London, which is one I've talked about before. Thought I was going to be famous. I had to fight off a shadow government that I'd been injected with the virus. It all got very messy very quickly. But I stopped smoking weed forever after that first episode, shortly after, really. Because I tried it once again afterwards, and it blew up my head into all that previous psychoses. So I just completely avoided it forever. I've never touched the stuff ever again. I do notice though, because I've got quite a few friends that have schizophrenia, that they seem to not give it up, and I've noticed patterns in me and the people that have psychosis, schizophrenia, that continue to smoke these things, and I wanted to share my insight. Weed makes you happy doing anything you're doing. And what I've found out, and drugs do as well, drugs alter your emotional states, right, and the way that you feel. And what I've found with my psychosis, the way I had to get better with my psychosis was observing my thoughts and watching the developments of my thoughts very carefully. And what I mean by that is that over the early years of my disease, condition, state, whatever you'd like to call it, I wouldn't pay much attention to my own mind. And in my own mind now, but I know what's happening because I've traced it back, but I would hear myself saying things like, I really am the chosen one. Wow, I'm going to be God. I'm God. Wow. Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to do when I have total power of the world is this and this. And, those are crazy, crazy thoughts, right? But I would build them. And the thing is that our thoughts have a major effect on our minds as well, right? What we think in our minds has the ability to influence our emotional states. And also, thinking certain thoughts has the ability to rewire dopaminergic connections so that we feel incredibly good about exploring these thoughts and fantasies. And the problem is that when you smoke weed, when you do a drug, you're not paying attention to your thoughts, and your thoughts can really go everywhere, and your emotions are more elevated than they usually would be, and so you don't really care that you're generating all these thoughts, and maybe you're just doing it automatically. Maybe you're sat there smoking a joint, 5 hours passed, but you've created this messiah-like complex in the mind, which then one day turns into a psychotic episode, for reasons I've spoke about in other videos. And so what I find is that the complete avoidance of any agent going into the body, even alcohol, is completely 100% necessary to get the condition of psychosis, schizophrenia under control. It's not what I see, though. I know loads of people diagnosed with the condition that smoke, take drugs, even psychedelics. Oh my God. I can't imagine anything worse for someone who needs to order their mind again. Remember that I've talked about how psychosis, schizophrenia, and these maybe even BPD that present psychoses, it's because of a lack of a concrete reality framework, because of childhood environments which haven't necessarily supported the development of one. Due to this, the mind is unbound, right? It's unrestrained, so it has a tendency to go off in all kinds of manners of ways. And when you take stimulants, when you take a drug of any kind, you don't have any control over where that mind is going. And one of the things that I've noticed is that this prefrontal cortex area is one of the most common atrophied areas in the brain of people with schizophrenia, but it's also the part of the brain that makes you do hard things when you don't want to do them. If you're constantly taking drugs, if you're constantly following the pathways that release dopamine in the brain, like forming messiah complexes or even other fantasies and stuff like that, this part of the brain isn't getting any use, really. This part of the brain is for doing hard things. It's for exercising self-control and discipline and self-regulation. And so if you're only using these animal parts of the brain, which is a lot of the time what drugs activate, they really reward these central elements of the brain, then you're just growing that region and shrinking the region that helps you have any self-regulation. So in effect, when you're smoking weed, you're purely adding to that pleasure circuit in that animal part of the brain, and your thoughts are going to represent that. And that's dangerous, right? That's really, really dangerous for you, because if you're with a condition where you need to get a handle on your thoughts, you need to gain control over your own mind, but you're adding agents of influence to it, it's impossible to control and give structure to your mind. Thoughts also become habits in the brain. And you have a part of the brain called the basal ganglia now, which is shown in new research to actually store thought habits. And so you need to be working on developing, really, thoughtful habits that encourage an attachment to reality. But I don't think that's what happens, right? And that's different from, say, the treatment that they provide today of talk therapy and CBT, because really those things are to acknowledge emotional states and all this sort of stuff. But you need to encourage attachments to reality, I thought about this a couple of weeks ago. I was like, how much time have I actually spent thinking about people not trying to kill me? Because I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about that stuff, even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it's just for an hour when I get a little bit too carried away, or maybe I go into an episode. But I've never really thought the inverse. And I've never really thought the inverse, because to think the inverse means that I need proof. I need to get evidence somehow. And I'm very happily thinking about these things without evidence because it's an emotional state, but I don't necessarily think the reverse when I'm calm and collected, because I'm calm and collected. I'm just focused on my own experience. Maybe I'm playing a game or studying. And so I really tried to shift that. And I have done that over the years, and I've noticed a few kind of axioms, if you like, that have really helped stabilize me, bridging a gap between mathematical calculations and human interactions, which really helped stabilize me. For example, conspiracy theories are very unlikely to be a thing when they're as large as man going to the moon, because that would rely on thousands of people all being complicit in this lie. And we know this is even as an observed psychological phenomenon, that there's always one person. There's always one person who opens their mouth about something, right? And even in crowds, there's a thing called the wisdom of crowds. Like, someone will always get the right answer when you ask a crowd a question that's a mathematical kind and get them to guess it. The same way that a large group of people will always have that one person that's a whistleblower. It just seems to be a law among us, right? And that little calculational thought about the universe and the way the world worked helped me break free from these other delusions of schemes, right? And it's important that we develop those thoughts, but you don't do that when you're taking drugs and you're smoking. And it sounds like I'm lecturing now, because I unfortunately have given back into nicotine, because I get quite affected by the stress of being in this van. When I smoke nicotine, I get more impulsive, literally. My mind gets more impulsive. That's what nicotine does to you. It makes you used to immediate gratification. And so I kind of think things up a lot quicker, which affects my stress and my architecture. And then all of a sudden I'm noticing myself hear voices and, get more delusions and stuff appear. And that's the nicotine that does that to me. And just nicotine, I am going to quit that again, just saying. I know how bad it is for me. I am going to quit it again once I get out of the stress of this ban, because I had given it up previously for like a year, but this triggered it off again. So I know I know how hard it is, but you have to see the correlation between the damage that it does to you, and at least acknowledge that and work towards getting better. And at the very least, you can realize that, I know someone who I see smoking weed all the time, and each time I meet them, I see how much more abstract they're getting. They make sense to me, but they've got schizophrenia, and I can see how much more abstract they're getting because they refuse to put the weed down. Weed and other drugs make you comfortable thinking up things and having experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have when you were sober. Because you might go, I don't want to think about that because I know where that thought goes. But when you're on weed, you're like, hey, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to stay in there for like 2 hours, because even if it's kind of grey, the thoughts are grey, you've got dopamine response from the weed in your brain. So hey, it's actually really colourful while you're there and under the influence of weed. But then when you're sober and you're trying to work or you're trying to handle stress, well, all that architecture that you've built is now going to come into action because neurons are alive. And so each thought you have in the mind is a neuron. It's a neuron communicating, right? And if you get a neuron attached to a certain idea that you've created rather naively or sillily or through paranoia or something like that, well, that system is alive. And so it's going to want to engage with other things in your life. It's in your brain now. And I don't think people have really this knowledge of how powerful thoughts are yet today, and how much we do need to watch our thoughts to make sure they're not getting away from us, to making sure that we're not fantasizing about something that we really shouldn't because it's not good for our behavior. Things begin in the mind and they end with our actions. Okay. And so it's really important to realize that you can alter your states of consciousness through your thinking, and that you can do so in very damaging ways, especially when it's about schizophrenia and psychoses. The moral of this is that I know how impossible it is to stop something, but you have to listen to the wisdom and stop the things that are damaging you, even if that means going to a rehabilitation center. And you have to make peace with those things in a way. I wanted to make this video because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand the dangers of weed, especially in the times that we're living in. With all the children now that are being raised in worse and worse environments as well, more destabilized and pressured environments, lots more stress, with this housing crisis and everything going on, and food crisis. As those kids grow up, we don't really acknowledge the danger in this way of weed and stuff, how it can break down the little foundations of reality fabrics that they have and lead to these states of psychoses, which can last for the rest of their lives. And I think that's a very important thing to nail in to people. But yeah, that was my video on weed and psychoses. Have a great day.